Before I tell you the horror story I lived with my ex, I must warn you that there are some pretty disturbing things in it. Things that can be very uncomfortable for some sensitive people. And if you are one of those people, I recommend you to skip this story. I already have enough to carry with my own trauma. The least I want is to cause discomfort to someone else. That said, here goes. For as long as I can remember, I have always been in search of true love. That soulmate they talk so much about in the movies. Some of my friends think it's silly, but since the age of 15 I had imagined my Prince Charming, convinced that he was out there, just around the corner. Looking for that love hasn't been easy. My relationships in my 20s didn't last at all, and that didn't get much better when I turned 30. But giving up wasn't an option for me, because I felt that at any moment I would find the man of my dreams, and we would live a love story so perfect that we would tell our children about it as the best adventure of our lives. However, what I didn't know is that this quest almost cost me my life. I have always been an adventurous girl in love, so going on dates and flirting with strangers in bars was a piece of cake for me, and I often told myself that every relationship I started would end in something nice and lasting. But the reality was that the guys I was interested in were only looking for fleeting things. I remember one of the most handsome and charming men I knew one day told me that looking for love was crazy, that he only wanted a one-night stand, and that the Prince Charming I wanted didn't exist. Most guys were like that, which frustrated me a lot. No one seemed to want a real connection, unlike me. But just as I was about to throw in the towel, I met a guy named Tom. We talked on a dating app, and even though he didn't have an overly interesting picture on his profile, the conversation flowed so well that I decided to give him a chance. Tom was tall, with brown hair, a small beard, and a charming smile. A bit shy, but he knew how to carry a conversation. On our first date, I dared to ask him why he hadn't put up a good picture of him, and he just shrugged, saying he didn't think he looked as good as I made him look. Our first date went great, and already when we got home, I was imagining what our future family would look like, even fiddling with his last name to see what my name would sound like next to his. Dating Tom made me feel so good that I wanted to spend as much time with him as I could. As we went on more dates, he would surprise me by sending me little gifts after each encounter, and he was too sweet, texting me to know how I was feeling and always being very attentive. But there was something weird. He had never tried to take our relationship a step further, and I didn't understand why. I worried if it was because he didn't like me enough, so in the end I decided to ask him. Tom, I don't know if you're a very traditional guy, or if you just don't like me, but I'm intrigued to know why you haven't tried to get closer after all our dates. And then he smiled and replied, "It's not that I don't like you. On the contrary, you're beautiful, but I'm attracted to things a little different than conventional, and I don't know if you're ready for that." This immediately intrigued me, so I didn't hesitate to ask him what he meant. Well, I like BDSM, and I was waiting for a better time to mention it. I felt a knot in my stomach when I heard what she said. Truth be told, I had never been comfortable with ideas of domination or things like that. I wanted to tell him flat out no, but I saw how excited he was, and, worse, I had already grown attached to him, so I was silent for a moment, and Tom, noticing my reaction, took my hands and said, "Hey, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. I only brought it up because you asked. I really like you, and I'll do whatever makes you feel comfortable." That was so sweet. Also, up to that point he had been extremely respectful and was probably the first guy I had gone on several dates with without him constantly insisting that I take the next step. On the contrary, he had been patient and genuinely interested in having a steady relationship with me, and I really liked him a lot too. With that in mind, I took a deep breath, hesitated for a second, and finally said, "Okay, Tom, What would life be without taking a little risk, right? I'll do this for you because I care about you. His smile widened, and he gave me a huge hug. Although the idea didn't thrill me at all, I knew a lot of people did enjoy it, so I figured nothing could go wrong if I tried it with him, who was the sweetest guy I'd ever met. That night, he invited me to his house. When I arrived, I knocked on the door and almost fell over in fright when he opened it. Tom was looking at me with a smile, but what I saw made me scream and take a step back. Seeing my shocked face, Tom laughed and asked me what was wrong, and as I tried to regain my composure, I barely managed to ask him what was on my mind. Tom looked confused, as if I was too normal, and said, "Oh, you mean my pain mask? I didn't mean to scare you, but it helps me get into the mood." Despite his attempt at an explanation, I was terrified. What he called a pain mask was nothing more than some sort of hideous cage made of barbed wire and rusty nails that he wore on his face. Seeing him smiling as those things cut into his skin almost made me vomit. But the scariest thing was that to him, this was normal. I knew a little about BDSM, but this felt totally out of control, and those intense, sweet feelings I had for him were slowly fading away. The person in front of me no longer looked like my sweet Tom, but a full-blown psychopath. At that moment, I regretted agreeing to go all the way to his house that night. I just couldn't go through with it. "This is too much for me, Tom. I'm sorry, but I think it was a mistake to come. I better go home." But at that moment, his gaze darkened and he said, "That's why I didn't want to tell you. I knew you couldn't handle it. But there's a problem. I can't let you go just like that." His eyes had a very disturbing intensity in them that I had never seen in him before. At that moment, I knew I had to leave, but as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm tightly and pulled me back. Feeling very frightened, I began to scream, begging him to let me go, that he was the man I loved, but my words didn't seem to reach him at all. Tom dragged me into the basement with force, and when I got there, he roughly threw me to the floor. Then when I looked around, I noticed rusty chains and dried blood everywhere. I now felt fear paralyze me. "Please let me go, Tom. Help!" I screamed, hoping someone would listen, but he just laughed out loud and said, "No one can hear you, Linda. I made the basement soundproof because I wanted us to share our desires without interruption. I know you can take this. The love between us can withstand any pain, and I'm sure you feel the same way I do." I was in a state of total panic. I realized he was mentioning other girls, and I began to wonder how many women like me had fallen into his clutches. Just as I thought that, Tom chained me to the wall and, in horror, I watched as he reached for an axe full of rust. I screamed at him, begged him, I didn't want to die like that, to please let me go. But he seemed to be in some kind of ecstasy, seeing me terrified and pleading for my life. However, instead of annihilating me with an axe, as I feared, he raised the axe forcefully and dropped it into my left hand. When the rusty blade touched my bone, I let out a scream of pain that echoed throughout the room. Until that moment, that was the most gut-wrenching pain I had ever felt in my entire life. But what I didn't know was that things were only going to get worse. Seeing that the axe hadn't completely severed my hand, he began to cut my hand with the rusty edge of the axe as if he was butchering a turkey, and the horrifying sight of him amputating my limb left me speechless. The pain was something I can't describe in words. I can only say that I screamed until I was speechless, my tears soaking my cheeks. As I screamed, I noticed that Tom became more emotional. Then I understood that he didn't want to kill me right away, but to make me suffer slowly. The amount of blood I had lost left me dizzy, and my suffering was so much that death began to seem like an option. But I didn't want to give up, so I kept fighting, trying to endure the hellish pain. Looking around for something, I saw a loose pipe on the wall, so with all my strength, what I had left, I pulled it out with my other hand, and luckily Tom was so focused on enjoying my suffering that he didn't notice. Then I hit him with the pipe just as he came up to attack me again. I honestly don't know where I got the strength from. Probably all the adrenaline that was running through my body at that moment made me draw strength from where I didn't have. But the truth is that the impact knocked him unconscious immediately, and although my body protested with every movement, I searched in his pockets until I found the keys to the chains. I now had the keys, but freeing myself with one hand and with all the pain I was in was quite a feat. But I finally managed to break free and ran out of his house screaming at the top of my lungs. It wasn't long before neighbors and passers-by surrounded me. They immediately called the police and asked me what had happened, but I was so weak I could barely speak. I had no idea how much blood I had lost, but keeping my eyes open was a challenge. In the end, I managed to mumble Tom Ray Mayer just before I passed out. The next day, I woke up surrounded by doctors and police. They told me they couldn't put my arm back together, so they operated. It was a huge blow, and when the officers spoke to me, they informed me that Tom was gone before they arrived. I cried in fear, anger and despair in my hospital bed, because not only had I lost my hand, the justice I had fought for was also slipping away. I told the authorities everything that had happened, and they quickly began the investigation into Tom, but in the end it turned out that name was false. He had been using an alias. Although they did their best to find him, he never showed up, and even though it's been 9 years since that day, I still remember every detail of that frightening experience as if it was just yesterday. Despite therapy, I have not been able to move on because I know he is still on the loose, stalking other women who are fooled into believing he is their Prince Charming. Yes, I am one of the lucky ones who survived, but living with that burden doesn't feel like it. Every night in my dreams he comes to find me and tells me that our love will withstand any pain and is worth dying for. Besides, every time I look at the place where my hand should have been, I can't help but relive it all over again. It's an agony I don't know if I'll ever escape, but I won't rest until I find justice. That night I turned over in bed and ran my hands along the left side of my bed. In between dreams, the warmth of the sheets enveloped me so much that I began to doubt if I had really woken up. I looked for her on her side of the bed, but her absence was obvious. I was so used to us always cuddling until we were both fully awake that her absence made me feel that something wasn't right. So I opened my eyes and, as I feared, she wasn't there. "Bess!" I called out to her, turning over in the messy bed, but there was no answer, so I rubbed my eyes trying to clear my mind as the confusion slowly faded. Realizing I was alone in the room, the familiar atmosphere of this place brought back all the memories. The smell of wood and the dim light reminded me of home, very different from the bustling apartment I used to live in. It was this room that had given me the roots I needed to have someone like Bess. The image of those amber eyes full of love flashed in my mind, and for an instant, I smiled. Bess was, without a doubt, my ideal person. I always wondered what I would have done without her, especially after going through one of the worst experiences of my life, the death of 3 of my friends in an accident. I didn't know what had really happened until the police called me to ask if I knew anything, but the pain of loss had me totally numb. I leaned over the edge of the bed, feeling that their support was all that really mattered. Then I blinked and looked up at the ceiling, trying to get my bearings. I was actually glad I had decided to return home to my parents and take refuge in this familiar room, where pleasant memories flowed, if only for a moment. My parents, despite how uncomfortable Bess felt with them, adored her, and that filled me with joy. I had told them that she loved me, and they were happy about it. It was as if that certainty enveloped me, as I remembered what she had told me earlier. It would be all right, love. Everything will pass. But although I tried to hold on to that idea, the guilt would not leave me alone. My friends had died of carbon monoxide poisoning in their car, and the police had informed me about a call I didn't make, inviting them to an event. My alibi had proved effective, but that truth was the only thing that had saved me from potential trouble. Life had taken a dark turn in the blink of an eye. The friends I would have done anything for now, those who were like my brothers, were now dead, and I couldn't help but feel that growing guilt. Bess had been by my side. She had even helped me pack for the trip. She made sure everything went smoothly. As I plopped down on the bed, Bess' reassuring voice echoed in my head. I quickly got up and put my feet on the floor, trying not to lose my balance, as I carefully made my way to the bathroom. But it was dark, so I fumbled for the switch and managed to turn on the light, but it barely illuminated the place. Frustrated, I wondered why no one was talking about it and thought of Bess. I assumed he had gone out to find another bathroom, so I went back to the room, but suddenly I felt I needed to go to the bathroom urgently. I stepped out into the hallway in complete silence, and the bad smell hit me immediately, making me stop. Bess! I called out to her again as I crept forward towards my parents' room, feeling my body tremble with anxiety as I approached. The smell grew more intense as I walked, almost as if it wanted to drown me. I tried to restrain myself, but it was so unpleasant that I couldn't help it. Then I reached out my hands to the wall to find myself and not fall over from the strong stench. At that point, I took off my shirt and pulled it over my face so I could breathe a little better. "Daddy! Mommy!" I yelled as I walked into his room, my voice sounding more scared than I wanted it to. Fear came over me as I opened the door, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. The whole room was filled with thick steam, and my eyes burned from itching, but I kept moving forward to the bed. Then the worst was confirmed all at once. Mom and Dad were there, cold and lifeless. I couldn't tell who was who in the thick steam, and I felt terror take hold of me. My heart was pounding and I was about to explode. I knelt by the bed, unable to process what I was seeing. Panic drove me to slowly crawl out of the room, and there the thought of calling the police crossed my mind. But my stomach was twisting and all my senses were on alert. It was as if someone was trying to get me, and I couldn't stop thinking about Bess. "Please, Bess, don't," I muttered as I pulled away. Suddenly, I heard his voice next to me. You shouldn't have gone in there, honey." I froze, feeling a shiver run up my spine. "My poor baby," he said as if he really cared. "Come, I'll help you." I had been relieved to hear her, but I knew something wasn't right, and the relief turned to disbelief as her words sank into my mind. They had to die too. Her matter-of-factness in stating that paralyzed me. "I'm sorry. I can't let you devote your attention to anyone else. I do it because I love you," he confessed, and my eyes widened like saucers. "It undoes me inside," he barked, because every word that came out of him was like a bark of rage. I felt absolute terror. Looking at her filled me with horror. She was a menace. "What are you saying?" I asked. Her face had a calm expression that didn't match the horror I had unleashed. Bess, my girlfriend, the same one who seemed so perfect and so good, was actually filled with a deep darkness. "Death is easy for them," she said, as if it were normal. When she took a step forward and I reacted instinctively, I pushed her against the wall hard, and immediately her body fell to the floor, completely immobile. She had definitely fainted. "God, for God's sake," I repeated as I ran away from her, completely terrified. I could barely process what was happening. I wasn't thinking clearly, It was chaos in my mind, but I had to call the police. That much I clearly knew. I immediately ran to my room again and looked for my cell phone. Then I returned to the hallway and saw that Vez's body was still lying in the same place. For an instant I felt a deep fear that the blow had been fatal, since in the midst of all the chaos, I knew that if she died, I would be the main suspect. I would surely be accused of murdering my girlfriend and my parents, and because of the manner, I would also be blamed for the death of my friends, which I was now clear who had caused. I immediately dialed 911, and fortunately it took less than 10 minutes for the patrol car to arrive, as well as the ambulance. Unfortunately, the doctors confirmed the death of my parents, but Bess was alive, just unconscious from the concussion. As I imagined, the cops put all their attention on me. I knew I was suspicious, but after giving them my statement, they did an investigation on Bez and discovered that her parents had also died, coincidentally from monoxide poisoning. Just as she had done at my parents' house that fateful night, Bess had left the kitchen vents open during the night, locked the doors, and left the house while her parents slept. Once she recovered, she was placed under arrest, and after a brief interrogation, she finally confessed to her crimes, and as she told me that night, she assured the policeman that she had done it for love. When you think of a perfect relationship, what do you imagine? Two people who understand each other, love each other, and help each other be better at all times. But for me, the only relationship I've ever had led me straight to jail, and honestly, it wasn't my fault. I always knew that, as a cop, it was going to be complicated to date girls, because generally, the women in my job stayed away from my colleagues, but that didn't bother me, because I really loved my job. It was at an office event where I met Sarah, the only daughter of a well-known local politician. From the very first moment everything flowed between us. We quickly went from chatting to hanging out, and suddenly we were in a serious relationship. Just like that. Sarah was a photographer and traveled a lot for her work. She was spectacular at what she did. She even made me pose for some of her shoots, and that made me fall in love with her even more. I never thought I could date someone so amazing. It's very common that sometimes when you're at the beginning of a relationship, you completely ignore the red flags, either because you don't see them, or because you just decide to let them go. Sarah knew that being with a policeman was not going to be easy, as she had seen her father deal with the stress of his job, and knew that my job was just as complicated as it is for all public servants. She was already aware that due to confidentiality issues, I could not tell her what I did or give her many details of my cases, and she seemed to be okay with that. I thought that being the daughter of a politician meant that she would understand me better, but the reality was quite different. One night, while I was sleeping at home, I found her checking my cell phone. Instead of getting angry, however, I was disappointed. It showed that she didn't trust me, and it really hurt that she thought me capable of being unfaithful to her. I was madly in love with her, and couldn't even think about looking at another woman. That night we had a monumental fight, and she ended up leaving my house in the dark. I was so hurt that I didn't try to stop her. I just wanted her to trust me, but she was a tremendously intransigent person. She was very angry, because according to her criteria, it was me who didn't trust her, and so I never shared with her the things I did or told her about my cases, nor did I tell her where I went or who I was investigating. Sharing details about my work could only put her in danger, and I had met too many not-so-good people to risk her. Sarah never understood this, although we eventually made peace and returned to what was normal. But from that day on, her insecurities only increased. On one of our dates at a very prestigious French restaurant in town, I ran into an old college friend, Marco. He was having dinner with his wife and kids, and I thought it was great to see him after so long, so we started chatting. Sarah was sitting at the table hearing everything, and I thought she would be happy that I was meeting a friend. But when Marco left, she bombarded me with questions about him, and her attitude was very negative. I got a little frustrated. Marco had only been talking about his family. He was right next door, mumbling about what he did before he met her, but Sarah didn't seem to understand. As the months went on, our fights started to become more frequent and our outings became weird. The relationship was a real emotional roller coaster, and I didn't know if we could go on like this, because it was so exhausting to have all these arguments with her, and it seemed like there were more times when we were angry than when we could truly enjoy our relationship. One time, while I was in the middle of an interrogation and couldn't answer Sarah's messages, she drove me crazy. She called me 24 times and sent me close to 50 messages asking where I was, what I was doing, and if I was cheating on her with another woman. This was the last straw. Sarah and her unhealthy jealousy was not only stealing my peace, it was becoming a real headache between me and my work. When I finally got home that night, she was there, with the worst attitude you can imagine, demanding explanations and screaming hysterically. That led me to decide it was best to call it a day. I was truly fed up, exhausted of the whole thing. There was no trust or respect between us, and although there was love involved, that wasn't enough. But when I told her it wasn't working anymore, she went crazy, slapped me, and in a fit, cut a sheet of paper from my desk and slit her wrist with it. I was in shock and understood how complicated it was going to be to leave her. I tried to relax and approach the matter calmly. So I calmly told her that we were not being happy and that we did not understand each other, so the best and healthiest thing for both of us was to separate. But she went into crisis, assuring me that if I broke up with her, she would end up alone because she did not want to be with anyone else. And that happened, she no longer wanted to live, and this made me very upset. I just wanted her to be okay and have a happy life. I didn't want our breakup to turn into another battle, and much less that she would really end up hurting herself. So I tried to talk to her father, the politician, but he refused to get involved. He said the problem was between me and his daughter, and he wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted to tell him that Sarah talked about taking her own life and that she needed professional help, maybe therapy, but he was too busy for that sort of thing. We spent a few more months together. Even though it wasn't the best situation, I put up with it because I didn't want him to hurt himself. But honestly, I was feeling miserable and trapped in that extremely toxic relationship. But everything changed when my department assigned me to a drug and murder case. From the very first moment, I knew this was going to be the biggest challenge of my career. If I successfully solved it with my team, I could get a promotion, something I had worked very hard for. I have always taken my job as a police officer seriously, and Sarah knew that. As we investigated, the level of danger increased, and we soon discovered that powerful people were involved. All that time, I avoided telling Sarah about the case for obvious reasons, but as always, she thought I was hiding something from her. I was so focused on the investigation and chasing leads that I was hardly ever home, and that didn't help our relationship at all. The case I was investigating became a respite from all the drama I was going through with Sarah, and my team and I were ready for this. As we reviewed the leads, we seemed to be getting closer and closer to solving it, and when I was on an intervention or interrogating a suspect, I just couldn't answer Sarah's texts. I was so focused on dismantling this role and making my mark as an officer that I couldn't afford distractions. But Sarah couldn't understand it. One day, she showed up at the station unannounced. He said he was bringing food for everyone, but in reality he wanted to check if I was really busy working or if I was cheating on him. It was crazy. I never did any of that to him. And when my team and I followed a lead on a drug shipment coming into town, we were ready to catch the people responsible. However, when we arrived at the warehouse, We got the surprise. They had been tipped off and started shooting. The situation got out of control and everything was in chaos. We were trying to arrest as many as we could, when suddenly I heard a scream that made my blood run cold. It was Sarah. To this day, I don't know how she ended up there, but one of the criminals had a gun pointed at her and demanded that we stop shooting or he would shoot her. My supervisor, who was on the scene, was trying to negotiate, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I was completely desperate and dazed by the stress of the situation, and Sarah's sudden appearance on the scene only made me even more upset. That's when I made a last-minute decision that cost me dearly. I was always one of the best shots in my team, so I felt confident in aiming for the head of the man holding her captive. I gave him the order to let her go or I would shoot, but he didn't even flinch, so I did. I fired, but unfortunately at the last second he moved and the bullet hit directly into Sarah's head. She fell to the ground lifeless, and I was paralyzed, in complete shock, and my carelessness gave the criminal an advantage. He pushed her body and shot me too. I could not react, and the bullet went through my left eye. I woke up later in the hospital, tied to the bed, and with the left side of my face full of bandages. I had lost my girlfriend and my eye. On top of that, I was now facing charges for her death, because I had allegedly disobeyed the orders of my superiors while they were trying to negotiate. Now I'm locked up, being treated like a criminal while I wait for the trial to end. Every time I open my right eye, I see Sarah in the corner of the room staring at me. I don't know if she's a ghost, or if my mind is playing tricks on me, but one thing is for sure. My life is forever changed. And all because I didn't have the courage to break up with her for good when I could. Last year, my husband and I took a trip to Yos, and it became one of those experiences we will never forget. One night, while returning from the valley, we were crossing a dark stretch of road near El Portal when I noticed something strange. The car's headlights illuminated what appeared to be a person lying in the ditch, feet pointing toward the road. I noticed it right away, so I told my husband there was someone there, but he took a quick look and said there was no one there. I insisted there was, but he just smiled and told me I should stop watching those shows because they were making me hallucinate things. Now, I'm a big fan of real-life crime stories, and that's what my husband was referring to. But in this case, I was convinced that what I had seen was very real. However, he insisted that it was just some garbage bags, and he kept asserting that. No, it was a person, I repeated for the 1,000th time, but he ignored me. When we finally arrived at the hotel, as we were parking, my husband looked at me and asked me if I was really sure what I had seen. He told me that if I wanted to, we could double-check, and then it was as if urgency came over me, knowing that I couldn't just leave it at that. So, yeah, I told her we had to go back. We made a 180-degree turn, and, as we passed the place again, I could just make out feet in the dark. "Stop the car!" I yelled, and he slammed on the brakes. I rolled down the window and shouted, "Hi, are you okay?" But there was no response. I tried again, this time louder. "Hey, are you okay?" And suddenly a woman dressed all in black sat up all of a sudden. She was wearing a very nice leather jacket and dark pants. She had her purse and several bottles of water next to her. Her makeup was flawless and she had a sweet face, but she also seemed to be in a world apart, at which point I turned to my right and saw that my husband was completely shocked by the situation. I asked the woman where she was going, and she told me she was trying to get to the Chevron station up ahead. She mentioned that her mom was waiting for her there to pick her up. I was surprised when I realized that this woman must be over 40 years old, and something about her answer didn't sound right because that gas station was about 7 miles from where we found her. She thought it was only a mile from her hotel and she could walk, which didn't make sense in that cold winter, so we offered her a ride, and she climbed into the back seat of our car. But before getting in, she tied a scarf around her neck, looking wary, as if she expected something bad might happen. I didn't think much of it, and thought maybe she was a little disoriented. As we drove, we tried to talk to her, ask her trivial questions, as if that might make her feel more comfortable. I asked her why she was lying on the side of the road, and she told me that she had simply gotten tired of walking and decided to rest for a moment, as if she was ready to give up. I thought it was strange since she was not wearing a hat or gloves, and the cold was intense. I felt she was too vulnerable. When we finally arrived at the Chevron station, the woman thanked us, got out of the car, and sat down on a bench right in front of the store. We told her we could stay with her until her mom arrived, but she refused. She assured us she was fine and didn't need company. But something didn't quite add up, so I kept insisting, reminding her that there was no phone signal in the area, but there was no convincing her. We finally returned to our hotel, a little relieved, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. Upon arrival, I noticed that there were 2 patrol cars in the parking lot, and I realized that they had not been there when we first arrived. I remarked to my husband that I had a feeling those patrol cars were there because of the woman we had found, so I carefully approached one of the police cars and asked the officer if they were looking for someone missing, a woman. He confirmed that they were and asked me if I had seen her, so I told him everything that had happened, from the moment I discovered her until we took her to the Chevron station. The officer thanked me for helping her and mentioned that he could not give me details of the situation, but that it had been a smart decision on her part. I took a chance and suggested that they go check on the woman at the Chevron station to make sure that she had really been okay and that her mom had arrived. As I was talking to the officer, a disturbing thought occurred to me. I realized that everything that had happened had probably originated at the same hotel where we were staying that night, so upon returning to our room, I decided to do a quick search on what had happened there. I consulted the local police log, and, upon reading the reports, my heart sank. A case of domestic violence had broken out at the hotel, and the woman had been very brutally assaulted by her partner. Worst of all was to learn that she was so terrified that she decided to escape, trying to flee in the dark without even a flashlight. She had probably walked about half a mile from the hotel, but all the pain she was carrying led her to give up and simply lie down. I could sense that she thought she might die there, unable to return because she had already escaped from her husband. I learned that she had gone to the front desk to call her mother and her husband, realizing she had escaped, alerted the police. The man who abused her was arrested, thanks to her bravery and desperation. Since then, I have not stopped thinking about her. Is she back with her mother? Is she safe? I'm always worried if her mother picked her up or if she went back to that man. Every time I tell this story to my husband at the mention of the body in the road, he falls silent, remembering how close we came to something much darker. It's a life lesson I'll never forget, and one that will always make me reflect on the fact that you shouldn't ignore your gut. It was a summer a bunch of years ago when I was a little younger than I am now. I was about 19, so go figure I'm 42 now, and yet it still scares me to think about what happened, and sometimes I have nightmares about it. I have always believed that life is not a straight line, even if no one believes me, and that's why you should never blindly trust what you see. That summer, I decided to take a pet-sitting job with an elderly couple who looked to be in their 80s. At first, I thought it would be an easy, uncomplicated job, since I only had to take care of their cat while they went on vacation for a few days. They told me they only needed me to feed the cat every 5 or 6 hours, and keep an eye on his minimal care. It was easy money, so I didn't think twice. The day I went to their house, I gathered all my things from the car, including flashlights, because they told me their house was a bit dark and they preferred not to turn on the lights. I also brought extra clothes just in case. When I went inside, the first thing I noticed was a very strong musty smell. It was strange, because the house looked clean and tidy, but the smell was so strong that I could not ignore it. The old lady showed me around the house, which was quite comfortable, had 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, with carpets on the floor and modern decorations, despite the age of the owners. Then, she took me to the room where I would sleep, which was a nice and spacious room, with a big bed, a bathroom, and basic amenities. Everything was perfect, except that the musty smell was more intense there, and the carpet seemed lighter than the rest of the house. I didn't think much of it at the time, and just followed the lady as she showed me around the garden and other parts of the house. An important part of the story they told me was that they had a son who also lived in the house. I was told that his room was in the basement, and that he never came out of there because he was sensitive. I don't know why, but that struck me as a bit odd. After about 40 minutes, the elders left, and I was left alone with the boy, and everything was going fine for a couple of hours, until something strange happened. I was watching TV in the living room, when suddenly I heard a loud door slamming coming from the basement. Normally, that would have scared me, but I knew the sun was down there, so I tried to ignore it. A few minutes later, however, I heard the basement door slam open, and that confused me. If he supposedly lived there, why would he close the door again? I tried not to think about it too much, but being a bit of a dumb teenager, I decided to go see what was going on, despite the old lady's warnings. I got up from the couch and tried not to make a sound as I walked to the basement door, and when I got there, I saw that the door was wide open, and the stairs leading down were plunged in darkness. There were no windows and no light, so I thought maybe the boy had gone upstairs to get something to eat. So I headed for the kitchen, hearing no sound to indicate that he had entered, but when I rounded the corner, I saw him standing there. He had dark brown hair and blue eyes, and looked like a young man in his early 20s. He was also quite attractive. At the time, I thought maybe I had misjudged him. But what really surprised me were the things he had in his hands: a long rope and a kitchen knife. And just after looking at me, he whispered, "Basement." At first, I didn't think it was weird, because we lived in a small town, and in the 1990s there weren't many bad people around, and old people didn't seem like the kind of people who would harbor a criminal, so I just walked away. But despite what they say about curiosity, in this case it saved me, because as I walked through the basement, I remembered what I had said, and something clicked in my head. Something wasn't right, so I grabbed my flashlight and went downstairs. It wasn't a very big basement. There was only a couch in one corner and a coffee table, and next to it was the bedroom. But the smell was unbearable, a mixture of rotten eggs and that musty smell I had noticed throughout the house. Even though I knew I shouldn't, my curiosity led me to open the door, but what I saw was definitely something I was not ready for. There was a guy lying on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. This man was wrapped from head to toe in rope, and the meat cleaver was leaning against the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was completely paralyzed, trying to process what I had just discovered. My eyes filled with tears from the horror of the scene, and I noticed that there were bugs and maggots everywhere. Then I recognized him. It was the same person I had seen in the kitchen. The same shirt, the same pants, all the same. If I was horrified before, now I felt like I was about to faint. I was so terrified that I was petrified, with my feet anchored to the floor for a few minutes, until a huge worm jumped on me and that brought me out of my trance. I can't describe how fast I got out of that house. I can only say that I ran as if I was being chased by a legion of demons, although I lived too far away to do so. Finally, I managed to call the nearest house I could find before I passed out from exhaustion and told them what had happened. It turns out that the old couple had killed 3 people in the room where I was sleeping. That's why the carpet was lighter there, because they had bleached the whole room several times, and the guy in the basement was victim number 4, and I would have been the 5th, if not for the basement guy's ghost warning me to go down there. This old couple were serial killers who had been moving from town to town for the past 50 years, and the total number of people who may have been victims of this sick pair, whose evil was so great that even in the twilight of life, they did not stop their lust for killing, is still unknown. Despite their advanced age, both were tried and sentenced to death, but death came to both of them from natural causes, before the lethal injection. Only 2 months after entering prison, the old man died of a heart attack, while his wife suffered a stroke and died the following year. I can't say I've had the best luck with the kids. Ever since I separated from Jack, my son's dad, things have been a mess. After 5 years together, love became a battleground, so I decided it was time to be myself, but more importantly to have peace. After a few months of being a single mother, one day, my neighbor, Oscar, approached me with the idea that a friend of his wanted to meet me. I must say that at first I was not very enthusiastic about it, but Oscar was so insistent that I finally agreed to go out with this Leon. The first 6 months dating Leon were great. He was funny, kind, and made me laugh. But little by little, things started to change. He started to drink more and more, and every time he did, he transformed into someone completely different from the kind and loving man I had fallen in love with. It was as if some sort of inner demon was taking advantage of him every time he drank too much, and then he would end up doing absolutely reprehensible things. Leon started fighting with strangers and sometimes even with some of our friends. So slowly everyone started to back off, knowing what happened when Leon had too many drinks. But that didn't seem to matter to him in the slightest, because he just kept drinking, not stopping, and the change in attitude became more and more evident. But it wasn't long before all that anger fell on me, and that's when everything went to hell. In a few months, what started as absurd arguments, unfair claims, and constant fighting moments soon escalated until they escalated rapidly, and soon from words we moved to pushing, and then to hitting. One day he gave me such a blow that I fell to the ground, almost unconscious. At that moment I became very aware of how badly it had all gone wrong, and little by little I began to feel more and more trapped in that abusive relationship. I was trying to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but nothing seemed to get better. The abuse was getting more and more intense and more brutal, and I was feeling more and more helpless. I know many people will judge me and say why I put up with all that and didn't separate from him. And the truth is, I don't know myself. The problem with abusive relationships is that the abuser manages to lower your self-esteem so much, to break you so much, that in the end you feel helpless, captive, and you really feel incapable of doing anything. I remember one night in particular that marked me forever. It was a Friday. I had spent the day taking care of my son, Adam, who was only 3 years old and had a bit of a cold. As Lion was getting ready to go out that evening, I told him that I wanted to stay home taking care of Adam, but he disagreed and started drinking as usual, which was already starting to get on my nerves. As the night progressed, he ended up being very drunk, just as I had feared, and around 2:30 a.m., I heard him come into our bedroom. I tried to pretend to fall asleep, but I knew it was what was coming, and that feeling of panic and anticipation would be horrible. In a moment, I felt his hand on my head, pulling my hair and dragging me out of bed. "I know you're avoiding me," he whispered to me. Then he started yelling at me, accusing me of wanting to leave him and cheating on him with another man. Leanne started making accusations, saying that surely there was another, and demanding that I tell him who it was. With every word that came out of his mouth, I could see his fury growing. And I remember him saying with all certainty that if he ever saw me with another man, he would kill me, and him as well. What terrified me most about that threat, however, was the serenity with which he made it, as if there was not a shred of doubt in him. But almost immediately, his calmness had vanished, and all that was left was a madman full of rage and a great desire to hurt me. Like a raging beast, Leon hit me several times with such brutality that I collapsed to the floor, almost unconscious, but not content. He began to kick me, and I knew I had to get away, or this time he would kill me. So I began to crawl away, trying to call for help. But at one point, he knelt down in front of me and said, "Where do you think you are going?" lifting me by my hair and crossing my arms with a smirk that chilled my blood. I felt completely helpless and scared. "Stay there, or I'll hurt you a lot more," he added as he settled back on the couch, looking me in the eyes as I sobbed on the floor. Somehow he seemed to get tired, and after a few minutes, he fell asleep. I figured that was my chance, so I put on a big shirt, picked up my son, and went to the door. But suddenly, Leon woke up and saw what I was doing. "Where are you going?" he asked me angrily. But I asked for a moment to think and realized I had to act fast, so I told him I was going to the kitchen to get him something to drink. The distraction worked, and when I entered the kitchen, I ran out the front door. No shoes, no pants, nothing but my shirt and my son in my arms. I ran out in a mess with my whole body in pain to the police station, which was only a few blocks from where I lived. And when I got there, I was so scared I could barely think about what I was doing. The entrance was simple. There was a button you pushed to talk to someone, so I ran in, stuck to the wall, and pressed the button as I slid to the floor, holding Adam. I was completely terrified, expecting Leon to come through the door at any moment. I couldn't help but think that if he came, at least he would be caught on the security cameras. Finally, I heard a voice over the loudspeaker. "How can I help you?" All I could do was cry. I couldn't articulate a single word. I felt so lost and scared that I couldn't even say anything. At that instant, 2 officers arrived to help me. One of them, a girl, approached Adam and gave him something to eat while I talked to another officer. I started to tell them everything that had happened, and he seemed really concerned. He offered me a blanket to keep me warm and comfortable and told me that they should take me to a hospital. However, barely 15 minutes had passed when I heard Leon shout my name from somewhere, and my heart stopped at the sound of his voice, holding my breath as I wondered if he knew I was there, just behind the door. Soon after, an officer returned with a sergeant. At that point, I thought I would be asked to go home to get my things while Leon was in custody. But instead, they started asking me a bunch of questions about his violent behavior and if there had been abuse issues before. I started telling them how he had become aggressive when he drank and told them about his dependence on alcohol. It was then that they showed me a handwritten list that Leon had made of his own plans. This list detailed how he planned to strangle me, dismember my body, and where he planned to bury it so I would never be found. I felt short of breath as I read those words. With tears pouring down my face, I looked at the officer, terrified, and asked him what that meant. He looked at me seriously and told me that I had essentially been very lucky, because Leanne had been charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault before. Before the trial started, I decided to move to a small town in Arizona. I didn't want to look back, so I gave a detailed statement before I left. Leon, of course, pleaded not guilty, but he was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in prison. Just before I left, I received a letter from him. In it he only said, "It's not over. You will always be mine." That letter chilled me, but I knew I was finally free of his control. I was ready to start a new life. I received counseling and additionally enrolled in self-defense classes, something I have become very good at. I also bought a gun and learned how to shoot, so if that monster ever crosses my path again, now he's the one who will have to take care of me.